For more on the markets, we crossed to Nompumelelo Siziba at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Nompumelelo, how are the markets reacting to that cabinet reshuffle last night?
Thanks very much, Nzinga. Well, I think the signifier or the indicator of how the markets responded, the best one is really the local currency. And it didn't really seem to react that much. Just before the announcement, the rand was hovering around 11.57 against the US dollar. And thereafter, yes, it didn't really move that much. This morning, it was around 11.56 mid-morning, but it has since weakened further, and it's now around 11.60, thereabouts. So not quite sure whether that's attributable to local factors or whether it's a product of the US dollar movement, but we'll get some analysis on that in just a moment. In terms of the local equity market, the all-share index is in positive territory. That's in line with global markets, where we're seeing positive gains, generally speaking, although we did see in China and Hong Kong a little bit of a slide, as you mentioned. Markets really looking to hear what the Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, will have to say around inflation and interest rates. It's an important speech. Will he follow the tune of his predecessor, Janet Yellen, which is to say, will gradually raise interest rates and, everything will be data dependent? Or will he just, be more hawkish and signify that they're going to be 5 interest rate increases as opposed to 3, which the Fed had indicated in December? We wait and see. And of course, if that's the case, we might see global equities wobble as people reposition their portfolios. Let's take a look at the indicators. Well, I'm joined by Maudi Lenzwane. He's from Lehuma Capital. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Let's look at the global picture first. US Fed Chair is going to be his first testimony to Congress around inflation and interest rates. What will markets be looking out for?
Look, it's an important one. It's the first one, and I think what the market will be looking at, it's always the case at the beginning, where we're getting a new Fed chairperson coming through. And we want to get an idea of just how different is he from the previous, Fed Chair, Janet Yellen. And I think that will be the focus area. Will he, become a bit, indicative, or will he actually give us an idea that he's going to be increasing a lot more aggressive as compared to Janet Yellen, or will he continue the same path? Those are some of the things that we'll be looking at. But when you look at the whole, just the U.S. economy in general, you get the U.S. economy. You've got a U.S. economy that's certainly on a very strong footing. We're beginning to see inflation rising. Currently, the market is expecting 3 interest rates increase for 2018. If we get, inflation overshooting to the upside, then we could actually justify why they will then start talking about hiking a lot more than that.
Interesting to see that the ECB President Mario Draghi saying yesterday that he's not quite sure about fanning inflation in Europe. That is, as much as Europe seems to be growing, he's not sure that inflation is going to reach the target. And as a result, he's going to be maintaining the QE stimulus. Now, for a long time now, the markets have been pricing in the possibility, and we've seen the euro strengthen on the back of that, that indeed they're going to pull that QE by September time. So that's a little bit of a mixed signal. What does it mean?
Look, it's a very difficult one. It's always a very difficult one to balance between having the economy that is growing after having stimulated it. And even though the economies, most of these economies have recovered, the likes of, even when you look at the US, inflation is still benign. The same thing with Europe as well. You've got inflation that is significantly still lower. So he has to balance off withdrawing the stimulus quite quickly before there's any stabilization, particularly when it comes to inflation. So inflation is still benign. that's often the challenge. You don't want to create another situation such as Japan, where you've got the relatively low inflationary environment. So I think that's the challenge that these central banks have, is that this stimulus has not created the inflation that is needed to, to justify why they should be hiking interest rates. Because if you've got a lower inflation, you cannot hike interest rates, because that would obviously have a negative impact, further pushing down the value of your currency, and further, of course, resulting in the depression of inflation. So I think it's a very difficult balancing act, and the one that they've got to be careful about how, the timing of the withdrawal of this stimulus.
Yeah, you're right, because I guess it would reverse, those gains that you've seen in terms of the green shoots, in terms of growth there in Europe. And then here at home, finally, President Ramaphosa delivered that cabinet reshuffle announcement last night. There was a lot of toing and froing, postponements, but finally we got to hear. There's been a mixed reaction to it. Give us your view on it and ultimately what it meant for the rand. Look,
I think firstly, the reshuffle was expected, widely expected. There's an old saying which says, buy the rumor, sell the facts. It's reflected in the currency movement. We've seen no reaction at all, because to a larger degree, this was expected. There was going to be changes, particularly within the finance ministry. We were expecting changes there. The state-owned enterprises, or the public enterprise ministry, was another one that was earmarked for changes there. So no surprises. There are certain areas where I think it's correct, and I think South Africans are justified in being surprised as to what transpired in those departments, because some ministers were definitely the weakest links, and I think they should have definitely been sacrificed, the likes of Batabile Dlamini. And then it tells you that there was a balancing act of some sort to balance between the politically versus the economy. So it was a compromise type of a reshuffle, but I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm encouraged by the new ministries that we have, particularly those that are more economy facing.
Indeed. Now, in terms of the rand, obviously it's done extremely well. Yesterday it hit 11.51, somewhere there, against the US dollar. But my question is, do you think now it's perhaps a little bit overvalued? I mean, I was reading a Standard Bank report, the economists there believing that actually it's now a bit overvalued. What's your view? And should it strengthen? It's good for us in terms of importing less inflation, but it will be very negative for our exporters, won't it?
No, look, it's always very difficult to try and get the perfect level of the rand. I mean, this is the figure that is affected by two economies, basically what's happening in the country, and also what's happening overseas in the US, if you're comparing it with the US, the dollar. So it's difficult to say, it's 11.50 the fair value according to what mathematical formula? So I think only at a certain point, it's a trade-off between your exports and the imports. If you have a strong currency that at some point begins to discourage people from buying your own products, then it becomes problematic. But I don't think anybody can come and say 11.50 or 12 rand or 13 rand. It's neither here nor there. It's just about how competitive your economies or your industries, especially the export industry, are. And I think around 11.50, we've had such a weak currency for a very long time, and it was primarily because of all the politics that we've had, the underperformance of our economy. So, in fact, the rand should have been at this level for the longest of time if we didn't have all the negatives. So I think this level is probably close to fair value. Can we get some weaknesses from here? It all depends on what happened. We've made all the right changes. Now we've got to really implement, because ultimately it's only through implementation of of the policies that we're going to set that we're going to begin to see the economy recover.
That's right. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time as usual. As Maudi says, now we've had all these ducks sorted out in terms of the SONA, the budget, and now the cabinet reshuffle. It's about policy implementation. People want to see what we do, not what we say. After a short break, Nzinga with more business news for you.